Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. Thank you for joining our webinar this afternoon. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to be part of this. Our topic today is family legacy planning. I'm Chad Hamilton, Director of Practice Management for Brown & Company, and I'm grateful to be joined today by Brandon Rains, an estate attorney and founder of Rains Law Firm. We'll attempt to cover our presentation and prepared remarks within the next 30 minutes. And then after that, we'll answer questions that you have. We have the slides we'll make available as well as a recording of the presentation afterwards. And now as for Q&A, rather than open the lines for questions, what we're going to do is receive the questions throughout, and then we'll read them off and attempt to answer those at the end. You don't have to wait until the end of the webinar to ask a question, though. You can submit those, just type those in at any point along the way, and then we'll address them later. Remember, we have an attorney on the line, and the clock is not running. No billable hours today, so take advantage of the opportunity if there's something that you would like to know. So here's our agenda. We've got three main topics we want to cover. First, we'll talk about preparing heirs for an inheritance, and there are a couple ways to address this. The first has to do with the way that a trust is drafted in terms of the language and provisions in there. The other objective then is to provide financial education to children, grandchildren, or any other family members to help them better steward assets that they'll be inheriting at some point in the future. Our second topic is traditional estate planning, and Brandon will share with us some best practices and also highlight the limitations of what we'll call traditional estate planning. And then this leads into our third topic, which is purposeful planning. And just like it sounds, this is about infusing an estate plan with purpose and intention. And then in the midst of that, we'll explore what it means to pass on non-financial inheritance. So you can think of things like wisdom, work ethic, and values that you want to pass on to the next generation.
At the macro level, what type of impact is estate planning having in children's and grandchildren's lives? So this survey that's given us these numbers has been going on since the 1980s. As far as I know, it's still an ongoing survey, and it's asking beneficiaries a simple question: has your inheritance been a blessing or a burden in your life? And 80% of the people who have received an inheritance, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren potentially, said that it's a burden, whether it's an emotional burden, mental, emotional, physical, financial, relational burden. People relapsing into addictions, they quit their jobs, they don't talk to their siblings anymore. They don't want to feel like they're benefiting from mom and dad dying, so they don't use that money. A lot of it's more than just I've spent all my money and all that I have is either consumer debt trying to maintain my standard of living that I now enjoy, or end up with regret, right? Which I think are still meaningful burdens. 10% were undecided whether or not it's a blessing or a burden, and 10% said that it was only 10% could say it was a blessing. Sorry, Chad. We can move forward. So pretty stark statistics. This one is within 2 years, on average, an inheritance is completely gone, right? And this slide is a kind of an amalgamation of two different slides. One is inheritance is completely gone within 2 years. The other statistic is 1/3 of all Americans who have received an inheritance have negative savings within 2 years. So it's not. So really, what all this is saying is, if the plan itself does not line up with reality, and reality could be mental, emotional, psychological, relational reality, people's lives oftentimes are worse off than they were before they received an inheritance. At least that's what I glean out of that. That's the conclusion that I draw out of it. So all these things, Chad, it's pretty shocking. I know it was shocking to me when I first learned these statistics, and it can certainly be discouraging. One of the most under-asked questions in business and in life is why. So, Chad, what have you found is the reason why these statistics are what they are? What's the motivation and cause behind it all?
Yeah, I like the question why. I don't, at risk of oversimplifying, because I know there can be a lot of reasons that some of the best laid plans can go awry, but I will say that a really big one is communication breakdown, or just a lack of communication. So when there's a lot of research around this, and one of the statistics that I want to point to here is that when successful people who have assets to pass on to the next generation are asked whether they believe that talking with children about money is a good idea, 3/4 of them say that yes, they think that those conversations are important. And you can see that shown with the brown slice of the pie here. Again, that's 75% that agree with that sentiment. But then those same people were asked how many of them are actually doing it, how many of these people are having these conversations with their children. And as it turns out, only 34%, or 1/3, are actually doing it. So you obviously see a big dichotomy between people's intentions around these money conversations as opposed to what's actually happening. And so one of the things that we do, and this is a newer capability of our firm, is to offer family educational workshops where we can facilitate not only conversations about money, but real intentional education around it. And it can be as detailed or not in terms of the specifics for any particular family. So we use a menu-based approach, which allows us to tailor it to the needs of the family member. In most cases, those are the children, sometimes grandchildren of the clients. And there's a broad range that we can cover. So it can be investments 101 or 201 or 301, depending on the level of understanding there. I can talk about cash flow and budgeting, how debt scores are built, financial planning and goal setting. Other meetings have more to do with estate planning and what are the different types of trusts and the different roles in an estate. Some families collaborate on philanthropy and charitable giving. So the meetings can look very different based on the needs and goals of the family. But we think that this can go a long way toward educating and getting everyone on the same page there.
No, I really like that. So are these meetings, are they family specific meetings? Are they workshops of classroom style where you teach and you learn? Is it interactive? So you've kind of covered the subject matter. What structurally, what are those meetings generally look like?
Yeah, it really depends. I mean, sometimes you have family members spread out geographically where it's not an option for everyone to be in the same room, and so we can do virtual meetings. And then as far as the content goes, in some cases, depending on what the family is interested in, it can be much more collaborative. So in a number of these meetings I've done, they've had values card exercises. So if you could picture a deck of cards, maybe 50 to 60 cards, and each one of them has a value on it, maybe authenticity, creativity, faith, humor, achievement, and so on. And each family member is asked to select their top 2 to 3 values. So they have those couple cards, they all turn them over at the same time, and then from there it can be a really interesting conversation where we say, so are you surprised by your son or daughter, father's answer, and their selections there? And a lot of times you do get these moments where it's like, wow, I really had no idea that would be your top choices there as far as what you value most. And it's a really good opportunity to talk through that. One of the things I always say about financial planning is it's like a puzzle where all the pieces need to fit together. But what we need to understand about puzzles is the most important piece is the picture on the top of the box. And so that this kind of, values conversation and some of those types of things help paint that picture, not just for an individual, but for a family collectively in terms of what is most important to them. And so that can be a good part of that as well in meetings like this. So to your point, Brandon, the question about what this might look like, this is just one example. It can take a lot of different shapes, but this is an example of a family workshop and the different sessions that we might have in there, and you can see what all that this particular workshop might cover, and how that's broken out into a few different sessions. The last thing that I want to say here, and I think it'll conclude, kind of give a synopsis of what we talked about so far, and then point toward a couple more things that we'll be addressing, is that we talk about purposeful planning and even more broadly multi-generational wealth planning. There's a couple different components to that shown as gears here. So I think everyone understands that legal documents are a part of that, and that's about preparing wealth for the family, right? But then there's another piece that I think is really important as well, and that's more along the lines of education and values, and that's really intended to prepare the family for wealth, and I think it's important to keep both of those goals in mind. So as we think about this, this slide here shows estate planning and then this purposeful planning. I think we need to, maybe it would be helpful, Brandon, to explain the relationship between these two things and these two terms that we're using.
Yeah, great. So estate planning, so really what this is, yep, right there, perfect, is purposeful planning and estate planning are not mutually exclusive. They're not separate and distinct. We use this image very, very intentionally, and that is that estate planning does a certain number of things. It fits within this circle. Purposeful planning includes and encapsulates estate planning. It's not ignoring it. It's not heading off in a different direction. It includes estate planning. We're not leaving it behind. I'm trying to come up with a bunch of different ways of saying it, just to be clear with that. We're not leaving the legal side of normal estate planning aside. We're building upon it and building around it. So then kind of what, Chad, to truly answer your question then, which is, what then is estate planning? That's the next clear follow-up question. And so what estate planning is, there's two main parts of estate planning. There's incapacity planning and passing away planning. What incapacity planning means is if you're alive, but mentally are no longer able to make decisions for yourself, what happens? And there's four main documents that are part of incapacity planning. There's a financial power of attorney, which is if you're unable to make financial decisions for yourself, who can make those financial decisions for you? There's a medical power of attorney. If you can't make medical decisions for yourself, who can make medical decisions for you? There's a living will, which addresses end-of-life scenarios. If you're in a terminal condition or persistent vegetative state, what do you want to have happen? Do you want those machines and artificial nutrition and hydration continued or paused or stopped or anything like that? And then a HIPAA waiver is the fourth document, which is a list of people that doctors can talk to. There's no decision-making authority. It's if Junior comes in and says, hey, what's going on with Dad? Can the doctor answer that question or not? That's what incapacity planning is. It's protecting your legal protection of your assets if you're alive but can't make decisions for yourself anymore. Passing away planning is legal protection and passing on of your assets after you're gone. This is that quintessential, do I need a will or a trust conversation, right? And I don't think we're going to be diving into that too deeply today, but just know that those are kind of the main tools to deal with, to address who gets what, when, and how, right? That's really what passing away planning is all about. So that's what estate planning looks like. Overarching, no matter who you're talking to, what is estate planning? Right? That's what that is. Now, we wanted to give you a couple tools to, as you're going through and talking with estate planning attorneys or kind of looking around, what are some best practices for estate planning? What are some differentiators between the okay, the good, the very good, and the great estate planning attorneys? So there are kind of 5 things that we've come up with beyond the purposeful planning, which I would say is a best practice for estate planning. So first is comprehensiveness. Is the estate planning attorney talking to you about things other than the documents? Is this a review of your financial assets, or are they talking to you about a home and car insurance review? What about gathering all of your financial information into one place so that people can find it? Things like that. Personalized. Are they giving you the information that you need to make the decisions that are best for your family, your assets, right? Is it personalized to you, or do you feel like you're being shoehorned into a square peg, round hole issue, right? Contingency planning is, if plan A doesn't work, is there a plan B or a plan C? Are there plans for if a beneficiary's life situation changes after you're gone and it's too late to change the plan, in the documents themselves, does the document have structures in it itself that gives you flexibility, right? Regular contact. So the stereotypical attorney, and I really don't want to make it seem like I'm bashing or criticizing anybody, but stereotypically, a client will receive their documents from their estate planning attorney, and they'll never talk with that attorney ever again. The average age of an estate plan in the United States, as the logical conclusion of that dynamic, is 19.6 years old. Now, the rhetorical question to ask everyone that you might have thought already is, where was I 20 years ago? Where am I going to be in 20 years? Where are my children going to be in 20 years? And that's just kind of what happens when clients when you get your documents and the attorney isn't proactively reaching out to you to make sure that everything is still up to date. And so that regular contact is the attorney reaching out on a regular basis, whatever that frequency looks like, to help make sure that your estate plan isn't frozen in time to 2019 when it's 2025, 2035, 2039. Right? So it's always up to date, even if there's no changes that need to be made. And the last one is collaborative. There's a reason why Chad and I are doing this webinar together, is because we understand that what I do for a mutual client impacts what he's doing with that mutual client. And what he's doing with that mutual client impacts what I'm doing with that mutual client. It does nobody any good if Chad and I don't talk. Say, hey, Chad, we're doing a revocable living trust. Or Chad says, hey, Brandon, we're creating a new investment account, or we're getting a new life insurance policy. If we're not having that conversation, then the plan is not working as smoothly and as seamlessly as it could otherwise. And so that collaboration between professionals can be powerful, really, in a lot of different ways.
Thanks. And, I think if someone was to do all of these things, it'll go a long way toward creating a successful plan. There's no question that these characteristics, because I've seen the other side of it, how this can really improve an estate plan. But I think it's important to acknowledge that no matter how well these best practices are implemented, there's still limitations, right, to traditional estate planning and sort of the scope of that. So can you speak to the limitations here as traditionally understood in terms of estate planning, and maybe that'll help us lead into the need for what we're calling purposeful planning?
Yeah, sure. So I think there are a couple little things. One is traditional estate planning says who gets what, when do they get it, and how do they get it. What it doesn't address or give voice to is the why. Why are we doing things the way that we're doing things? The other thing is, if you go back to that, not that you need to, Chad, if you go back to that 80% of the time an estate plan is a burden rather than a blessing, what this really shows is that traditional estate planning in and of itself sometimes, well, often misses the mark, which is traditional estate planning's job is to get the money there, get the money to the kids in the way that the parents and grandparents want. But what traditional estate planning struggles with is two things. One is influencing the beneficiary's behavior upon receipt of that money. So that's one, right? And connected with that is traditional estate planning, since it's only concerned about getting the money there, sometimes it falls short on influencing the impact that money has once it gets there. I was just talking with someone earlier today, as a slightly aside, he says like, hey, I've had these conversations with a friend of mine, tongue in cheek, is it crazy people that end up with a ton of money, or does a ton of money make people go crazy, right? What money tends to do, and I say that tongue in cheek as well, what it tends to do is accentuate pre-existing personality traits. That's what money tends to do, or accentuate pre-existing relationship dynamics. It tends to bring those out to the fore even more. That's my experience. But traditional estate planning doesn't address those underlying undercurrents below the surface of a river, right? And hopefully that's a descriptive enough term. And that's where purposeful planning and legacy planning and these family meetings can step in. It can address those other areas of impact, of vision, of voice, of this is what mom and dad would like us to do. This is their goals, and this is how much they love me, and all of these different things. Purposeful planning can kind of bridge that gap between the legal protection and transfer of assets with the practical implications of that estate plan.
And one of the things, just to add on to some of the points that you're making, Brandon, is there's, again, I'll go back to studies and research, because why not? We advisors like statistics and numbers. So this is a study that has been updated over the years, but the statistics, the numbers change a little bit, but the trends have been remarkably consistent. And this is basically just they're reaching out to people that have considerable assets to pass on, and they're saying, what's most important to you to pass on to subsequent generations? And what's remarkable about this is that financial assets and personal property and possessions and real estate are pretty far down the list. And at the top of the list, consistently over time, it's things like values, life lessons, family stories, family history. You'll notice all of those things are sort of the non-financial inheritance. And so that's really interesting. And I think it should cause us to pause and question our assumptions about, when we think about wealth, to define wealth more broadly, to encompass some of these non-financial aspects. But I think that the challenge is, when I see something like this, is yes, this is where a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people are interested in, but they just don't know where to start. So Brandon, I guess I'd throw it back to you and just say, how would you recommend someone go about getting this started? Is there just something that maybe is a takeaway here to wrap up our sort of prepared remarks that you would recommend people think about?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways, but the one that I kind of start my conversations with people with, which seems to kind of hit home, is this question. Let's imagine that you only had 30 minutes to spend with whomever is most important to you for a last conversation before you died. What would you want to say? And the beauty of this is the beauty of this question is it really automatically cuts our focus down to what is truly most important in life. It's, you're probably not going to be talking about things that don't matter, or grudges or griefs that you have with other people. It's other things. Most of the time when I ask this question to clients, I get more people who say not money, like explicitly say, quote, not money, than people who actually give some type of financial based answer. It's about relationships. It's about memories. It's about goals and vision and love. It's lots of times, right? And if that's not what you first thought of, that's okay. You're allowed to have your own answer. But what I would do is kind of ask this question. That's step number one. Step number two is start recording it. Whether it's writing it down or audio visually, speaking into a voice memo app on your phone, something like that, and just start recording. And then step three is tell someone where to find it. It doesn't do anybody any good if you've written this beautiful, amazing thing and no one knows that it exists. So for me, this is a good first step. What would you talk about if you only had 30 minutes? Start recording it and make sure someone knows where to find it. It's a great first step to really get you focused on what matters most.
Yeah, I like that. That's definitely a real clarifier, I'm sure, for people to think about that. And so now I do want to open it up for questions. And just a reminder, you're able to submit those online. So if you have a question, just type it in there and submit it. Here's one question that came in. So it's, I think, Brandon, this is for you. So what does a purposeful estate plan look like? In other words, are we just talking about a conversation, or is it more formalized and memorialized in some way in actual documents?
That's a great question. It could be both. I think at least my process and my approach, it's more the latter. Normally what I tell clients is a purposeful plan is most powerful when it's really a continuation of informal family conversations that they're already having, or ones that they are willing to begin having. I give clients who want to do this purposeful planning a series of exercises that they can do on their own. For me, at least, in my approach, and I know Brown & Co.'s, your family meetings are structured a little differently, and that's okay. My experience is most people do their best work when I'm not around. And so I give my clients a series of different exercises. Some of them are legal, such as naming a trust, if they have that. Another example of a legal exercise is explaining the purpose of the trust. What's the why? And those are some examples of legal exercises. Some non-legal examples are how we won the child lottery, memories of the day that you were born, gift of wisdom, the bridge. It's called the Bridge Builders Roadmap. Really what that is offering guideposts or guide lights to children to know how to, deal with life, or advice to a happy and successful marriage, or whatever it is that those people care about, or stories behind family heirlooms. The exercise there talks about, George Washington, he gave some of his swords to his nephews and explained the meaning behind all of them, and charged them to never unsheath those swords unless they're in defense of family and country, and if they do unsheath them, to never sheath them again until they've fulfilled their purpose. Like, I'm a total history nerd, but that story is incredibly awesome. I geek out of that stuff all the time. So they're all recorded. Some of them are legal. Some of them are non-legal exercises that might be passed along with the estate planning documents, but may not be in the legal document itself. So,
okay.
So here's the question. I'm pretty sure this is, well, not pretty sure, this is definitely for you, Chad. So does Brown & Company have any tools to help someone, practical tools to help with the process of getting started with a purposeful plan.
Yeah, I would point to one in particular. I mean, there are a few that we have, but we've got a legacy planning questionnaire, and it's just 20. It's not even. It's 18 questions to be specific, and it takes only 5 minutes to complete it. And what that does is that the way the questions are structured, it allows us to take those answers and then use that information to complete a draft of a one-page family mission statement, or what we call a family love letter. And the idea behind it is pretty simple, that it goes back to people like this idea of articulating values and what's most important to them and what they want to pass on and the source of their wealth and all these kinds of things. They just don't know where to get started, how to get started. And so this template that we have allows us to do that, and it draws from some of the best practices in the industry when it comes to family offices and some of the planning that's done for families. So we've systematized that, and if anyone's interested, it's just a legacy planning questionnaire, and I'm happy to share that with anyone. So just let me know as a follow-up. And I want to be sensitive to time, so maybe have time for, well, I'll just give you, we're still looking to see if any other questions are coming in. I have one for you, Brandon. How have your clients reacted to this type of planning that we're talking about? And maybe I'll preface that a little bit. Some of the things we talked about go well beyond the scope of what I would imagine people envision when they think about drafting wills and trust documents, right? So what has been kind of the, some of the reaction, at least, to this type of conversation?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two aspects to that. One is I've been in initial meetings with clients. The first time they've known me for maybe 45 minutes in their entire lives. And no one ever gets emotional or super excited about estate planning. They like the education, they like learning, but it's still kind of transactional, right? In a lot of ways, it's very informative. I've had on multiple occasions clients holding back their emotions, choking up, thinking about what it is that they can tell and what they can share with their loved ones. I've had other ones, the husband didn't feel like the wife would find value in coming, and we've talked about this, and she was the one who turned to him and said, we are doing this. I have told our kids all the time that I don't want their inheritance to be a burden, and this is the answer to that concern of mine. Just way more forceful than I was expecting it to be, because I was led to believe she wouldn't be very invested. So that's on the client side. On the children's side, I don't have any personal experiences of this, but my mentor, the one who I kind of referred to earlier, he has experiences of the impact that this can have on children after mom and dad have passed away. And he tells that many times the children are, instead of crying tears of sadness and grief, which is normal, in addition to that, though, as they're reading their parents' words and hearing their voices in these documents, they're also crying tears of joy. And that's so incredibly powerful. People going through a sad and grieving time, there to be a silver lining, to be a moments of joy and remembrance, of being remembered in a plan, to hear one last time mom and dad say, I love you. And it's written down. They can always read it for 2 or 3 decades from now. It can be incredibly powerful, incredibly touching for everyone involved.
That's great. And then we had another question that came in. It was, what level of wealth should someone have to start this process? I'll give my 2 cents on it, and then Brandon, if you have any thoughts on that as well. I think this is a big one for me, because I think that in this industry, in the wealth management side of the industry anyway, what we've talked about so far has largely been confined to those that have, you know, their own family office, or that are spending a lot of time, a lot of money to do family retreats and extensive work around this. And I'm not minimizing any of that. I think that that's all really important and particularly applicable. But one of the things that we think is really important is that that everyone's got access to this, because there really isn't. It's not as if what we're talking about is not broadly applicable. It is, and should be made more broadly available. So I wouldn't put a dollar amount on it. I do think that some of the things will be more applicable for some families that have more money than for others. For instance, if we're talking about some of the family philanthropy, and some of the planning techniques around that, or asset protection and advanced tax minimization, certainly those are going to be more applicable as you move up the scale in terms of assets. But in general, what we're talking about is broadly applicable. Do you have any thoughts on that, Brandon?
Yeah, I would say, you know, traditional estate planning is money focused, is quantitative in nature. Purposeful planning, again, yes, it includes estate planning, but the purposeful planning, the values side, is qualitative. There's no dollar amount that can be assigned to your values, your wisdom, your affection, your life experiences and life lessons. It's truly priceless. I'm not trying to sound too corny, but it truly is priceless. And so for this purposeful planning, I 100% agree with you, Chad. There's advanced estate planning stuff that has certain numbers associated with it, but purposeful planning, I personally believe that everyone could benefit from it, whether you're $50,000 or $50 million. It doesn't matter. There's not a price tag that's being put on. Your net worth is not determining your self-worth, right? This is your values and your wisdom that we're passing on. It's not about the dollar amount. So I would say don't worry about it. Just jump in and find a good fit and do it. Make it happen.
Great. And I think that's it as far as questions. If anyone, I realize you may have some that occur to you after the fact. Please just reach out to us and let us know. And if you have anything else that's on your mind, we'd love to hear from you. Like I said, we will have these slides available also. So thanks so much to everyone on this call. Thanks to you, Brandon, and we appreciate it. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.